Hi, this is Professor Stefero, and this screencast will cover energy coupling and oxidation reduction reactions, and oxidation reduction reactions as it relates to cellular respiration. So please watch the energy and the energy coupling videos prior to this video. If you haven't seen those first, I recommend that you watch them prior to this screencast. So here's our cell, and a cell's metabolism is divided into two kinds of reactions. Those that are part of the cell's anabolism, which are the anabolic or endergonic reactions. These are the ones that require an energy input. They're going to make molecules that are high in potential energy. The other side of metabolism is catabolism, or catabolic reactions. We also called them exergonic reactions. Here, large molecules, like the nutrients we take in, are broken down, and as a result, energy is released. And the cell captures that energy and forms ATP. Specifically, the nutrient that we talk about in catabolism that leads to the formation of ATP is glucose. Now, we break down glucose, but it can't directly be used to do cell work. It has to be converted to ATP. It's an energy conversion from one kind of chemical energy to another, which is the ATP. And this basically is what cellular respiration is. It's a set of reactions that break down glucose in a way that captures that energy and puts it into a molecule that the cell can use to do cell work. Here is our reaction of ATP to ADP and ADP to ATP. It's a coupled reaction that we saw in the energy coupling video. And a kind of coupled reaction that's being demonstrated here is one that's called oxidation and reduction. And cellular respiration is a series of oxidation reduction reactions. We usually call it Redox for short. So let me introduce to you the equation for cellular respiration, and ultimately we'll get to understanding what oxidation and reduction is. So here is the equation. This is an aerobic process requiring oxygen. We get the glucose from the food that we eat or that's stored in our body. We get the oxygen from breathing. And in fact, most people tend to think of breathing when cellular respiration comes up. Breathing and cellular respiration are closely related. Breathing is necessary for the exchange of carbon dioxide produced during cellular respiration, and cellular respiration is going to use that oxygen to help harvest energy from glucose and produce carbon dioxide as a waste product. Here it is at the cell. In every reaction, the reactants are rearranged to form products. The carbon dioxide that is formed in cellular respiration, each of those carbons comes from the original glucose molecule, and the water is from the oxygen when it combines with electrons as glucose is broken down. Here's our glucose molecule, and each of those carbons in the presence of oxygen will become carbon dioxide. So here's our summary equation again. What are the reactants? Glucose and oxygen. And through a series of chemical reactions, we'll end up with carbon dioxide, water, and lots of ATP energy. So let's define redox reactions. Oxidation reduction, or redox reactions, transfers electrons released when molecular bonds are broken and transfers them to new bonds in new molecules. So as glucose is broken down, the electrons are ultimately transferred to carbon dioxide, and this is oxidized. Simultaneously, oxygens gain electrons to form water, and this is reduction. Carbon dioxide is the result of glucose being oxidized. Water is the result of oxygen being reduced. So let's pull that a little bit more simply. Oxidation and reduction go together. If something's getting oxidized, something's getting reduced. When something gets oxidized, it's going to lose electrons. They'll get transferred to some other molecule. So in this case, A at the top left has 2 electrons, and as it goes through its oxidizing process, those electrons are given to B, and because B has gained electrons, it is now described as reduced. I know it doesn't make sense. You get some electrons, you shouldn't be reduced. A good way to remember that, though, because it is kind of confusing, is through the Leo the lion. Leo says grrr. And if you are losing electrons, then you are oxidized, and that's what Leo stands for. And if you're gaining electrons, you're being reduced, and that's what the grrr of the lion's roar stands for. And really what we're doing is rearranging hydrogens in this process. So the rearrangement of hydrogen atoms through oxidation reduction reactions is how energy ultimately gets used to form ATP. In any reaction, the cell requires enzymes, and an enzyme here called dehydrogenase is the one that removes those hydrogens. So this particular molecule is getting oxidized, but the electrons are going to get transferred to a very important molecule in cell respiration called nicotinamine adenine dinucleotide. I'm just going to call it NAD or NAD for now. But that molecule will become reduced. It will gain those electrons as that organic molecule is stripped of its hydrogens. So as the organic molecules in cell respiration are oxidized, those electrons ultimately get transferred to these 2 important carrier molecules called NAD and FADH. And they will ultimately help form ATP. NAD plus gets reduced to NADH, and FADH gets reduced to FADH2. In this situation, NAD plus is called the electron acceptor. So why is that important? So this is a depiction of a mitochondria, and we're looking at the inner membrane where there are those proteins signified by circles in the inner membrane. This set of proteins is called the electron transport chain. They're also serving as electron carriers. And at the electron transport chain, the reduced forms of NADH and FADH2 can transfer those electrons, become oxidized, reducing the proteins in that membrane, and they'll move from one protein to the next, and ultimately they pass to oxygen, and oxygen becomes the final electron acceptor in this electron transport chain. But as those electrons flow from the beginning to the end, oxidation reduction reactions are occurring because electrons are being transferred to each of those proteins. Every time that happens, energy gets released. So the purple balls in the center are the proteins in the inner mitochondria membrane. They're showing the flow of electrons that started by stripping those from NADH, oxidizing that back to NAD+, which is a good thing because then that will cycle back into cellular respiration. And all of the energy that comes from the transferring of electrons through oxidation reduction reactions is going to drive the formation of ATP. and the last electron gets put onto oxygen. So let's take a look at this video that talks about the importance of NADH in cellular respiration. Ta-ta!
Cells obtain energy during cellular respiration by oxidizing food molecules such as glucose. The energy derived from these oxidation reactions is used to form ATP. Oxidation can be defined as the removal of hydrogens from a molecule. Since a hydrogen consists of a proton and an electron are removed during oxidation. Whenever a molecule is oxidized, hydrogens removed, another molecule must be reduced, hydrogens added to it. During an oxidation-reduction reaction in the cell, an enzyme is involved in transferring the hydrogen, proton plus electron, to a coenzyme called NAD+. This enzyme has a binding site for both the substrate and NAD+. Once the substrate and NAD+ are bound with the enzyme, the hydrogen is transferred from the substrate to the NAD+. In other words, the substrate is oxidized, loses the hydrogen, and the NAD+ is reduced to NADH. As with all enzyme-mediated reactions, once the reaction is complete, the products separate from the enzyme and the enzyme can be used again. NADH, a high-energy electron carrier, diffuses away and is available to donate the hydrogen to other molecules.